Watch what happens when I add this shimmering, sparkling effect to water in my painting. Suddenly it's alive with sunlight, and this is such a good effect that you can use to create water in your paintings that's really eye-catching, and in this video I'm going to show you how to do it. I'll also give you some general tips for painting landscapes. Now what we're painting today is one of my favourite mountain views in New Zealand. I've painted it many times and it just naturally forms a good composition. So I've based this painting off some reference photos I took in southern New Zealand, and I just love the way the clouds are shrouding the tops of the mountains, but the main thing is the lighting effect that's in the foreground that's causing that sparkling water, and this is such a great effect to use in paintings. So I'm using oil paints here, and I've sketched out my composition using burnt sienna with a little pale drying gel medium. And then once my composition's sketched out, the first thing I do is I paint my darkest darks first. So the general rule is we'll find our darkest darks and our lightest lights in the foreground, and then as landforms recede, the darks aren't as dark and the lights aren't as light. So if we paint the darks first, it makes it a lot easier to create a whole tonal structure in the painting. This is referred to as value, and value is how light or dark your subject is. And I think getting your values right is most important. I heard a saying that said values do the heavy lifting whilst colour gets all the glory, and I think it's so true. If your values look good, your painting's generally going to look pretty good, but if they're not working, then the painting's just going to look flat. Now as we go into the distance here, so I'm painting these mountains in the background, but there's some quite deep shadows in them, but as they're going into the distance they're getting lighter, so the darks as we go into the distance get lighter. And what I'm doing is I'm marking in these shadow tones with a number 6 bristle flat brush made by Rosemary & Co, and if you want to get some, I'll put a link in the description box below. And the brand of oil paints I'm using is Blue Ridge oils. I love using these, really nice vibrant colours. Again, if you want to get some, I've put a link in the description box below. So I'm working in my shadows here, as I said, painting the darks first. And the colours I've used for this is mainly combinations of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, a little titanium white and alizarin crimson. So I've used a variety of different tones here, but with the same colour mix. And generally I've edged these mixes more on the blue side. Now when I say I paint my darks first, I do include lighter tones as well. So really I consider anything in shadow as my dark. So even these cloud shadows, which is actually very much lighter in value than some of the darks in the foreground here, but again I include this in my dark. So we're just setting this tonal range to begin with, and then once we've done that, it's just going to make everything so much easier for when you come to paint the areas in light. Now for the clouds here, I've pretty much used the same colours as what I've used in the mountains, only a lot more titanium white in the mix to make a lighter value. Then it came to painting the water. Now the water here is reflecting the sky and the clouds, mostly the clouds in this case. So I was actually able to use pretty much the same colours in my mix as I was in the mountains and the clouds. So this is one thing with water, the colours often determined by what it's reflecting, the surrounding elements as well, so it could be things like trees, but also the colour of the water itself. You know, is it murky water? Is it clear, transparent water? So these mountain streams are often quite blue because of the minerals that are washed down from the mountains. So I'd mark that in, and at this stage I'm not really worried about detail at all. In fact, I want something like loose and gestural and painterly, and that's how my artworks go in general. Now what I was doing here was I was just starting to mark out where some of that white water was going to go and where the sparkles will go later on in the painting. Now we're moving forward quite a bit here. Unfortunately I lost some of the video footage, so apologies for that. But the main focus of this video is going to be on painting the water. So by this point I'd blocked in my painting and I'd used loose brushwork. I used a combination of yellow ochre, ultramarine blue, cadmium yellow, titanium white to start mixing those greens, and then I was adding in colours such as burnt sienna, alizarin crimson, cobalt teal or phthalo green, just to get the variety of tones in the vegetation that's in the foreground and also the beech tree forest that's in the midground. And then I began the modeling stage. So mainly I was working on this mountain that's in the midground. And again, just paying attention to the values. So adding in some deeper tones there where a lot of those cracks are. Adding the reflected light. So even though this is in cloud shadow, there's light around it that's reflecting onto the surface of the mountain. So we want to create texture here to make it look like a rugged, gnarled looking mountain. And I was just using varieties of different values of pretty much the same color and just working on creating that texture with my brushwork. Now, one of the things about painting these types of landscapes is you don't want to get bogged down in detail unless you're a photorealism painter, which I'm not. I consider myself a realism painter, but not necessarily a detail painter, although this painting has a little bit of detail in it. I kind of trying to find the balance between the two. But you can often imply details, such as restating some dark values, like in the side of the mountain in the midground, restating some rocky faces, for example, and just with the sweep of a brush mark. Then I was working on these clouds here. So the clouds were a mix of mainly titanium white with a bit of burnt sienna for the highlight, and then just combinations of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, titanium white, and alizarin crimson for the cloud shadows. And then I was just using my brush here to rework them. For the sky mix, I used ultramarine blue, titanium white, and some cobalt teal. And I can actually use the sky mix here to help form some of the clouds by painting around the negative spaces. So following painting the sky, the next thing I worked on was the water. So this is one of the main things we'll talk about in this painting. Now, water can be complex to paint, so I like to just try and simplify it and identify where the darks are, where the mid-tones are, and where the lights. So we've got quite a lot of light values here, and I was just going over some of the darker values that I'd painted underneath during the blocking stage, and unfortunately I lost the footage for that, so I really do apologize. But there wasn't really any kind of complex brushwork in the beginning stages anyway, so what I'm doing now is I started to paint the suggestion of ripples, which are darker in value because they're not reflecting the sky, and that's just going to help to convey the moving water. And then once those darker ripples were painted, I was able to just go back over it again with some more highlight. So there's still going to be quite a bit more work done to the water, but I was just doing it in methodical stages and just letting each layer dry as I do it. Before I finish the painting, let me show you something that has been a game changer for displaying my art. It's an app that's called Frame It, and it transforms how you showcase your artwork. Watch this. I'll take a quick photo of this mountain painting here that I did a little while ago, and now I've got this on my phone. I'm able to resize it, and then Frame It adds it to the app, and then after that I can now see exactly how my artwork's going to look hanging in a cozy living room or a modern office or a luxury bedroom. I can resize it, I can try out different frames, gold, black, white wood, whatever matches the space. This isn't just about seeing your art framed, it's about selling your vision. When I post to Instagram or update my website, these professional mock-ups get loads more engagement than just photos of paintings on my easel. Clients can actually visualize art in their space, which could potentially lead to more art sales for you. Frame It literally takes 30 seconds and makes your art look gallery ready instantly. So if you're serious about selling your art or building your social media presence and just presenting your art in a really professional way, this app is essential. So check it out, Frame It. I've put a link in the description box below. It's available to download on the Apple Store or the Google Play Store. So check it out, Frame It. I've been using this app and I love it. So back to the painting, and I'd spent time working on the background and the water, and now it was time to work on the vegetation that's in the midground. So as the darks are already established, I then find it easier to paint the areas of the vegetation that's in light, and then I can later restate the dark values and even push some of that dark paint into the lighter values and just blend some of those colours on the canvas. So I'm using a variety of greens here to convey the different plants that are growing along the side of the river, but they're mainly varying combinations of yellow ochre with ultramarine blue, cadmium yellow medium and titanium white. And then again, other mixtures or other colours, including burnt sienna or a little alizarin crimson, to add a red element to some of those plants. And then if I want to increase the saturation of the green, I can use something like a phthalo green or a cobalt teal. Now with a colour like phthalo green, you've got to be careful not to use too much of it, as it's a very saturated colour and it can quickly overpower your mixture if you're not careful. Now when I was painting this, I was adding lighter layers of paint, so lighter value colour. When I started my painting in the blocking stage, I kept everything tonally darker, and this is a good idea because then it allows you plenty of room to build up lighter layers of paint as you work through the painting. And then we're going to be saving our lightest values until the very end. So I was spending a bit of time just working the zones in the painting here, restating some dark values, adding some highlights to the vegetation, and generally conveying an abundance of different plants. One of the ways you can create the impression of tall grasses is to get a bristle brush. So it could be a bristle flat brush, or in this case I was using a bristle dagger brush. And I was just painting lighter layers of paint, also adding some yellow tones in there, and then pushing the paint upwards in the direction that the grass is growing in. I was then further adding lighter tones to some of this vegetation, but this time applying less paint. So this is how you can build out the three-dimensional forms of whatever you're painting, whether it's the grass and plants along the side of the riverbank or the canopies of the trees. We're just slowly adding highlights here or lighter layers of paint, but going more sparingly with the paint with each progressive layer. Now back to the water, and at this point I'd added a little bit more detail, some lighter layers of paint to show where that rapidly moving water is. But the next thing I did was to start painting some of the rocks that are at the edge of the riverbank and in the water itself. So I was using a synthetic flat brush to first of all paint the shadow areas, and then after that I painted the highlights. So when I'm painting this, I'm thinking about where the light source is coming from, which is coming from the right side of the painting. So we got highlight and then dark areas. I also earlier on had painted the suggestion of some other rocks in the water and some submerged stones. Now this is where the real fun part of painting this water is, and this is where you can create a striking sparkling effect, and it's really easy to do. So you can see where there's layers of white paint already, which I'd actually darkened with a bit of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, alizarin crimson. And that's just to make the tone of the white darker, so that when we add the highlights here with these sparkles, and I've just used a mix of titanium white with a little yellow ochre, but we're just painting the sparkles on top, and that's going to really make it look more realistic and make it stand out a lot more. And those sparkles really make that water come to life. Now this part takes a little bit of time because you've got to use quite thick paint here, because you want the light to be able to reflect off the paint, which is really going to add to that sparkling effect, especially under gallery lighting. Then finally I finish up the painting by adding some last highlights. So if you remember, we save our lightest lights until the end of the painting. Now if you'd like to learn more about painting landscapes, perhaps you're having difficulty with getting the results you want with your paintings, maybe they look flat, you're struggling with colour mixing, creating depth in your painting, composition, then come and join me at my art school. Every week we go live and I run lots of painting courses. There's loads of pre-recorded painting tutorials and a community of like-minded artists that you can chat with and engage with. So if you want to accelerate your painting skills so that they're good enough to sell or hang on your wall and you're proud of them, then come and join me at my art school. I've put a link in the description box below. So I hope you found this video helpful and that it inspires you to paint water and mountains. If you'd like to learn more about painting water, check out this video here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.